Thank you very much for the friendly invitation to Fudan University and the philosophy department, and for Professor Deng An Kin for his friendly words. My topic in this time are 6 lectures on Hegel's biography. 2 lectures to the station Jena, and then to Hegel's Science of Logic in Nuremberg, and then 2 lectures to Hegel in Berlin, to the Encyclopedia and other topics. This is a small abstract, a small notices on Hegel's biography. Hegel grew up in the capital of Ducal Württemberg, Stuttgart. Then he studied theology in Tübingen with Hölderlin and Schelling. Then he worked as a private teacher in Switzerland, then as a private teacher in Frankfurt, and then in Jena. This is my first topic. Jena was in this time the capital city of philosophy. And I will speak also about the phenomenology of spirit. It's very short here. Then as a journalist, Hegel as a journalist in Bamberg. Then as a school teacher and director of Germany's first humanistic gymnasium in Nuremberg. There wrote Hegel his masterpiece, The Science of Logic. And then the first professorship in Heidelberg, and then at least in Berlin. Hegel became the greatest philosopher of his epoch, not Kant. Sorry. Okay, I will start with the topic Hegel's time in Jena. The birth of absolute idealism. It was in Jena that Hegel built his absolute idealism. This was the exciting period of intellectual growth where he created his one groundbreaking theory. This was when Hegel became Hegel. In mid-January of 1801, 30-year-old Hegel arrived in Jena. It was so famous for its culture and university that Hegel saw no serious choice as to where to begin his academic career. He was determined to study in the capital city of philosophy in these times. There were countless songs of praise to the university town and its philosophical golden age, which Hegel had surely heard. The university was a magnet for the greatest thinkers of the period, and transcendental philosophy was the noble son of Jena. Fichte's Science of Knowledge from 1794 made the Jena University into the city of birth of German idealism. Schelling's cousin Breyer wrote, "While the French were having a political revolution, the Germans were having one in the realm of truth. And in this regard, Jena was to Germany what Paris was to France." Fichte initiated one of the most creative periods in the history of philosophy. So strong was the resemblance to classical Athens that Jena was nicknamed New Athens. Athens had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles, Aristophanes. Jena had Reinhold and Schiller, Fichte, the early Romantics, Schelling, and of course Hegel. In the late 17th century, Jena was known for its diverse and dynamic, literary, philosophical, and scientific scene. Jena had a mixed classical, romantic, and idealistic atmosphere. Never in the modern age had there been quite such a combination of circumstances for philosophy. Never in the modern age. The little city was in a pleasant valley, the seat of German spirit during a heated time, when authority everywhere was crumbling. Hegel started working in Jena in 1801. The second stage of philosophy in Jena started with Hegel's collaboration with Schelling. And in 1807, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, the greatest book ever to be written in Jena, was both the highlight and the ending of that golden age. But when Hegel first arrived, no one guessed that it would be he who would set up the most powerful philosophy of modernity. Hegel was virtually unknown in academia when he started out. He was a philosophical nobody, a lecturer with no publications, whose name nobody knew. At best, he was Schelling's friend. But Hegel never had the feeling of being beneath or envious of his younger friend. Schelling was a professor in the age of 24. Hegel was not a professor, and he was 30. Hegel called, people said that Schelling had brought someone from his homeland to champion him. Hegel called this a lie. Then immediately plunged into the rowdy world of policy disputes, inviting dangerous accusation of atheism, Jacobinism, and Spinozism. He had to use the glossy Jena podium. The Jena course catalogue, which was dripping with philosophy, was the main topic in this time's philosophy, not other sciences. These times are gone. Which was dripping with philosophy, showed a wide range of viewpoints, from the dogmatic Wolf to romantic improvisation of philosophy of nature. Schelling got the best reception, lecturing on a system of philosophy, philosophy of nature, and aesthetics. Schelling. Hegel's friend Niethammer taught moral philosophy after the fashion of Fichte's ethics. And there were several courses on transcendental philosophy. Hegel was an auditor at Friedrich Schlegel, the Romantic, Friedrich Schlegel's lectures on transcendental philosophy. In this innovative atmosphere, what everyone had in common was transcendental philosophy, and now the new philosophy of identity from Schelling and Hegel. In 1800, the controversy between Fichte and Schelling was the main topic. Hegel jumped right into this. It was a wasp's nest, but Hegel was well armed for it, as shown by his spectacular debut, the treatise on difference, and his habilitation. The first book from Hegel about difference between Fichte and Schelling. This treatise made Hegel an immediate protagonist on the philosophical scene. The first book. Schelling told Fichte that, quote, "Today a book was written by a first-rate mind." Hegel, Schelling, and Fichte were becoming a sort of philosophical triumvirate. But they had disagreements, deep disagreements among themselves. Hegel had written as a refined literary strategy a defense of Schelling's philosophy of identity. But the treatise on difference was more Schelling than Schelling, and thus showed the difference between Schelling and Fichte at a time when they still had a lot in common. Yet at the same time, he made clear that Schelling's philosophy failed to see that the absolute is only determined as a point of differentiation between the objective and the subjective. Hegel starts right off by saying that Schelling's absolute is a night in which all cows are black. Hegel used Fichte's philosophy of identity, but went beyond it. At a crucial moment, he helped Schelling, who was at a dead end, to discuss transcendental philosophy and philosophy of nature. Schelling was still in great agreement with Fichte. He pointed out what set transcendental philosophy apart from philosophy of nature. Pure scientific knowledge is not quite philosophy itself. The treatise on difference contained a similar sentiment. The absolute act of free independence is the prerequisite of philosophical knowledge, but is not quite philosophy itself. Fichte's sharp reply to Schelling shows what a challenge Hegel was facing. Schelling's philosophy of identity, according to Fichte, was a new Spinozism, which makes the absolute quantitative, like Spinoza and all dogmatism. To be accused of Spinozism and dogmatism was troublesome. Hegel wanted to sublate. This is in Hegel, preserve, overcome, and elevate transcendental philosophy into a new state as philosophy of identity or absolute idealism. The treatise on difference closely scrutinizes Kantian and post-Kantian contribution to the revolution in a system of thought. Very sharp and original thinking, an extraordinarily rare product of a true scholarly knowledge of great importance. The new monism. Hegel defined the idea of an absolute whole in an original way. One and all is the absolute activity. The absolute system of identity is one, but also that same time of the absolute, which has two halves, nature and thought. In the absolute, the communal turning point of nature and I-ness or selfless, as well as its center of gravity, expressed itself. Nature and freedom are not mutually exclusive, and action and being should be called absolutely identical. They must not be seen as exclusion, and division, but inclusion and unity. This is where Hegel's double relationship of finite and absolute comes in. The infinite and finite has a double life, and the absolute as an idea, and is also independent. The absolute likewise has a double relationship to the finite, a constitutive one and an annulling one, destructive one, making it and negating it at the same time. This is how Hegel built his new monism in Jena. The goal is to rise the opposition between finite and infinite, between determinacy and indeterminacy, between immediacy and mediation. A real synthesis, not just an alternating reciprocal determination, but in the unity of the objective world and of freedom. Realism, which makes objectivity absolute, makes the world an objective given independent of any subjectivity. On the other hand, subjective idealism makes pure subjectivity absolute and teaches that the universe is only constructed by and for intelligence. Both propose a one-sided principle as the absolute, which is dogmatic. Dogmatic realism or objectivism accepts subjectivity only as an accident, accidentia in Latin, which means there is an insufficient possibility of freedom. Freedom gets mistreated. On the other hand, in the dogmatic subjective idealistic constructionism or subjectivism, objectivity and nature are the mere accident, a degradation of nature. Reason, how knowledge cannot just be subjective construction of the eye without any objective content, but also cannot passively receive a supposedly immediate given. The last is this, this myth of the given. Hegel wanted an active, lively reason that could freely and dynamically determine itself. Differentiating between these two paradigms of thought, reason and understanding, and making understanding into reason, that's Hegel's goal, and in difference to Kant, making understanding into reason are key parts of Hegel's thinking. He differentiated between knowledge through understanding, Verstand, and knowledge through reason, Vernunft. Also called this speculation or comprehensive thinking. This process of sublation has again 3 steps. Negate, overcoming the one-sidedness of reason. Conserve, keeping and integrating difference and non-identity. And elevate, a thoughtful examination from a higher viewpoint, especially looking for that which understanding cannot see which must have struck him as a paradox. The basic pattern of the understanding is non-identity, the solidification and division or duality, the logic of dualism. So long as this opposition persists, either the finite, determined, mediated, or the infinite, indeterminate, immediate, gets elevated dogmatically to the absolute. Understanding in Hegel cannot build any last logical bridges between them. At best, understanding solidifies antinomy. You know this principle in Kant of antinomies. This is the last word of the philosophy of understanding. But reason overcomes understanding's dualism. That is Hegel's project. It brings dualism, pure non-identity, into the domain of the absolute, which the absolute being full unity of subject and object. Understanding becomes an integral, inherent part of reason. Such an absolute, which Hegel was still calling in this time's life, represented the highest liveliness as in Aristotle. Fichte's pure thought of oneself is the true principle of the determination of reason, and made philosophy about freedom and raised it to the level of the absolute. Thought is in this sense self-activity, and the absolute is the self-determination of reason. Philosophy as science. Hegel confirms that philosophy is strong science, strong knowledge, and shows the importance of proof, of evidence, and in this case making reference special to Aristotle and Fichte. Knowledge needs to be secured by testing, the deduction, inference of categories in their logical necessity. Fichte's science of knowledge creates such a system where true idealism in pure, strong form emerges, the logical derivation of categories. By advocating a strongly scientific attitude, philosophy should see its task as the work of comprehension or of comprehensive thinking, and fulfill it only through justified concepts and strong evidence. A logically coherent system of concepts is crucial for philosophy. This is the main point for Hegel. It's an important idea of Hegel. A logically coherent system of context, crucial for philosophy. This is not the normal way. Only today we have other conception without legitimation of beginning of philosophy and such. Not without systems today. Most of the philosophy without system as a deduction, as a logical deduction. The determination of philosophy through a wide range of unfounded presuppositions was the issue. in Hegel's time and today. Dogmas generally came in the form of postulations without proof, without evidence, assumptions, revelations, empty assurances. Postulates are derived propositions from imperatives, and that's why an invalid foundation of knowledge. You cannot use postulation to ground or as a foundation of philosophy. It's impossible. Credenda of practical reason or inexplicable pure moral interests of reason or the highest innate facts of awareness, each of these approaches assumes that there is something before thinking, before reflection, beyond reflection, given facts, the unchangeable. Each are variations of the myth of the given. The thesis is there is something is given without proof. An unexamined assumption, a pure reassurance does not a philosophy make. It is a subreption, because then critical examination remains suspended. Immediacy, if merely assumed, is fraudulently acquired. A fatal leap into belief, akin to an appeal to oracles, belief. The effort to try to overcome paradigms of reflection or of understanding is laudable, but it places the foundation of the beginning outside the door of philosophy, and so abandons an important part of the justification. If feelings, belief, opinion, and taking things to be true are to be the foundations of philosophy, philosophy is courting its own downfall. With pure identity and the mere formality of the absolute, the things of transcendental philosophy becomes a rotting bridge of postulations, which Hegel was trying to break. Fichte's founding principle will always just be a postulation, because identity can only be constructed through assumptions. This mania of postulating leads to a new kind of dogmatism, that of subjectivity. The credo of the French Pyrrhonist skepticist Montaigne arms Hegel for his battle in Jena. Montaigne: all who arm themselves with postulations should have the opposite of that postulation postulated back in their face. For every postulation is just as valid as every other one. The greatest philosophical seminar in history, the Schelling-Hegel Disputatorium. From today's point of view, Schelling and Hegel's seminar, infinitely rich in opportunities for teaching and practice, seems spectacular. It started in late October or early November 1801. Two equal grandmasters of philosophy were confronting each other. They made this seminar together, Schelling and Hegel. There were controversial discussions of aesthetics, religion, history, and the latest concepts of identity. It was the confusion, one of the moments of the confusion in Jena, a disordered tangle, but also a symbiosis of creative thought. Academia and literary circles alike were explosively productive. Hegel could never have philosophized the way he did if he had not come into contact with so many other thinkers. It was very important, this communication between the greatest thinkers, between Schiller, Hegel met Goethe, and between Hegel and Schelling and other philosophers in this time. And poets also, not only the philosophers. It was very fundamental for his philosophy. The skepticism essay. The essay on skepticism in Jena 1802, it's a very important essay, includes the first mention of finding this Hegel's topos, the finding oneself in the other of oneself. The context is skeptical relativism. Hegel's appreciation of skeptical argumentation and its possible use against Fichte and Schelling, as well as the development of an individual concept of reason, begin with his interpretation of the 5 tropes of Agrippa. You can find these 5 tropes in the Greek skeptic Sextus Empiricus. There is, in Hegel's word, there is no stronger weapon against dogma and dogmatism. These tropes are their own field of understanding and the most likely consequence of reflection. The diversity of positions, the first trope, the infinite regression and infinite progression, the second trope, the principle of relativity, the main trope, the third. The fourth is the unproven postulation, and the 5th trope is the vicious cycle, are the thoughts that grasp the finitude of dogmatism, turning its own abstractions against it. One side of understanding turns against the other. Duality and diversity against unity. Pure difference against pure indifference. Relativity against non-relativity. For every principle of understanding, the skeptics, the opposite principle can be stated with equal, that is important, with equal validity, based on the well-known principle of antinomy. We have these principles of antinomy before Kant, and there is a universal principle in the old skepticism. In Kant only 4, you know, this antinomy theory in Kant. But it's the same principle. With antinomy establishes itself in the finite, the skeptic sees the untruth of the merely finite. The 5 tropes deal with the finite knowledge of the finite and with understanding. With negativity or finitude's self-destruction, understanding condemns itself to death. Itself to death. Itself. Not from the outside. Finite knowledge falls into the trap of infinite regress or progress and cannot legitimize itself. Relativity, the credo of relativity, is all knowledge is relative. Difference and non-identity find their highest abstraction and truest form, so Hegel's quote. If a principle of understanding is supposed to be unconditionally valid, the skeptic comes along to make sure, to heuristically judge, to introduce the possibility of at least one's alternative. This is the strategy of this old Pyrrhonism skepticism. The ultimate principle, this is this skeptical, one of these skeptical ideas, an example, the ultimate principle is like the earth which stands on a turtle's back, and the turtle is on an elephant's back, and so on, and so on. You can never come to an end. So, there must be an absolute first. If dogmatics fall into the infinite regress, this regress, turtle, elephant, and so on, they start with something which they don't justify, but simply ask you to concede without seeing proof. No proof. So the skeptic wins. He posits the exact opposite, also without proof, but with equal right. The dogmatic has no proof, and I have the principle against this, also without proof. And it's the same principle on the same level. So the skeptic posits the exact opposite without any proof, but with equal right. The total exclusion of finitude, determination of the particularity of the I or the self, makes any postulation mutate into something merely positive, incomplete, and thus develops an insuperable dualism between the infinite and the finite. The incomplete, one-sided absolute of dogmatism remains a mere abstract generalization of an unproven postulation or presupposition, and falls into the inescapable jaws of the fourth trope of Agrippa, the axiom of the mere hypothesis. It's only a hypothesis you can start. It's not knowledge, it's only hypothesis. And it's not good for knowledge if you have only a hypothesis. No proof. Finding evidence, proof, for the beginning of philosophy forced Hegel to drastically change his philosophy, his strategy of thinking while in Jena. Drastically, fundamental change. In 1802, he wanted to publish a book on logic and metaphysics, but he drastically changed because of this problem of beginning of philosophy. His debate with the five tropes helped him with this. He defended himself against this virus of relativity, which offers only the suspension of judgment, the restraint to all knowledge claims. Philosophy, so Hegel now, need immunity against the skeptical objections. The transformation of the logic of understanding into a logic of reason can only succeed if skepticism itself can be questioned, and by integrating the rational content from the tropes into the new conception, into the absolute, framing negativity as an immanent moment of the absolute. The third trope, the main trope of skeptics, all knowledge is relative, must, this is Hegel's strategy, must include itself all knowledge. And this sentence is also knowledge. And that's why this sentence is also relative. Must include itself, and so is a performative self-contradiction. Hegel used this inversive method. This skeptics successfully find the dogmatism of unity, but bounces back and hits itself like a boomerang. For the tropes only have reflection, understanding concepts, and establish themselves only on finite figures. Hegel shows that the skeptic destructs himself. Hegel thought that negativity, the necessity of including this negative, later he identifies this skeptical procedure with the dialectical, with dialectics, was important for the formation of absolute idealism. Integrating the skeptical dialectical in knowledge is the idea that provides the starting point and foundation of Hegel's new idealism of the absolute. All true philosophy, so Hegel, must also have a negative side, this negative side, which embraces and destroys the whole field of its knowledge with categories of understanding. This position fights against, so Hegel, this whole ground of finitude, the entire negation of all dogmatic, one-sided truth of understanding. The most decisive inspiration from this came, you know, from Plato's essay Parmenides, Spinoza's Ethics, Kant's skeptical method, and Fichte's foundation of the entire science of knowledge. Skepticism is internally one in all true philosophy. Hegel calls this self-relation, the self-determination, the self-thought of reason, calls this. Thus, reason does not become an unproven postulation that could be confronted just as legitimately with the opposite postulation. Proof and arguments are required, but certainly by no means of reassurances, postulations, and internal revelations. The consequent monism avoids excluding the finite from the infinite. Reason includes finitude and its antinomies, all the opposites, both infinite and finite, have their other in each other at the same time. Their unity is the true infinity, the absolute. Hence, the structure of double unity, of affirmation and negation. Determination is negation, and negation is determination. We can learn this in Spinoza. Thought is the thought, this is Hegel's, thought is the thought of thinking, complete being with oneself. Hegel connected Aristotelian's idea of process with the modern principle of freedom and subjectivity, with the moment of negativity as the free side of philosophy. Spirit recognizes that its other is itself, that nature is only itself. This knowledge frees spirit. It finds itself in nature and comes to itself. The true unity of subjectivity and objectivity consists in the thought of thinking. This is an Aristotelian principle. The unity in Hegel's word, the unity of subject and substance, of constructs and given. Hegel and Schelling part ways. Their friendship was broken in Jena. The cause is philosophical background. The differences between Schelling's and Hegel's idealism grew in Jena. The phenomenology of spirit heralded a gradual departure from Schelling's way of thinking, was the farewell to Schelling, and it could no longer be ignored. Schelling had not worked on making a logically coherent system. He stuck by his notion of intellectual intuition and dismissed the notion of logical knowledge of the absolute, even though, thanks to Hegel, he had become acquainted with the building blocks of a logic other than the traditional formal one. I will speak in the third and fourth lecture on Hegel's science of logic. I will come back to this. Hegel strove to support his philosophy with strong logic. This is Hegel's goal. A new logic as metaphysics was required. Only in philosophy and conceptual thinking can the absolute be expressed and satisfactorily presented. In October, I come to the end. In October 86, the war came to Jena. As the cannons become in the Battle of Jena, Hegel was finishing up the pinnacle of 1,000 years of philosophy. Hegel was very concerned about mailing his only copy of the work during wartime. He has only copy of his book. There was no copy shop in these times. In addition, he finished editing the midnight before the Battle of Jena. On October 13, 1806, two figures of world historical importance, Hegel and Napoleon, met face to face. Quote Hegel, "This emperor, this world soul, I saw him ride through the city of Jena to reconnoiter. It is indeed a wonderful sensation to see such an individual, here centered on a point, seated on a horse, straddling and ruling the world." People often say that Hegel saw the world spirit on horseback that day. But what Hegel saw was the most important teacher of constitutional law in Europe, who would bring new modern constitutions to Europe. In 1804, Napoleon had been crowned emperor in France and put this new constitution, the Code Civil, into action. On October 14, the ingenious general defeated the Prussians at Jena. And on the same time, on the same day, the manuscript of the Phenomenology of Spirit started its journey. The old regime, the feudal system, received two heavy blows in one day, one political and one philosophical, both from the small town Jena, with 5,000 inhabitants. Jena had 5,000 inhabitants, not 25 million like Shanghai today. 5,000 inhabitants. A month before the Battle of Jena, Hegel had written, quote, "We live in an important epoch, a time of unrest when spirit is shedding its old shape and is taking on a new one. All previous ideas, concepts, the bonds of the world are falling apart like a dream in the morning. A new emergence of spirit is preparing itself." End of the quote from Hegel. Hegel's house was plundered in the battle, so he had to flee. Billeting, fire on the streets, and plundering left their mark on the town. Thousands of the wounded and dying were brought into the town for treatment. Now Hegel compared war with the devil. He wrote Hegel's quote, "No one imagined war the way we saw it." About a month after this battle, Hegel left Jena to Bamberg to supervise the publishing of his Phenomenology of Spirit. And in early January 1807, he was hoping for a job in Jena, but then in mid-February he received the word from his friend that he could take over editing the Bamberg newspaper. He moved to Bamberg in March 1807. His Phenomenology of Spirit, meanwhile, was a priceless diamond in the treasure chest of philosophy. Thank you for your patience.